Hello, this is Lee Cooper, and this is my Module 8 case study, Get This Child Out of My Room, EDL 853. Alright, so problem identification and analysis. Part A. What do we know? So we know that Carl has an emotional disability. We know that he has a rough home life with a recent divorce, pretty unstable parents that are fighting and those kinds of things. We know that Nancy Taylor is not very supportive of having the child in her classroom or being willing to collaborate, those kinds of things. We also know that parents are in need themselves, as I already kind of mentioned, a lot of fighting, kind of self-focus, those things. We know that there is support from Mrs. Wills, who suggested the intervention plan, and also that being said, there are interventions available, and there's an intervention plan that they can put into place, and there are the resources for such an intervention, like the human ability to have that intervention. Okay, so part B, what do we need to know? We need to know outside or internal services. So, are there any way that the family, that Carl himself, can get any kind of time with a school psychologist, or maybe like even if that's not a school psychologist, but something within like a public service or something like that, where they could see a psychologist or a social worker that can work with that family? I know that I've been in situations where there are tough home lives and those kinds of things, and having a child that has issues such as Carl, and there was a social worker that would come into the IEP meetings on behalf and just kind of know the family and could advocate for the family and help with the issues that they might have. So I'm just curious, what is the availability that there are for those kinds of services? Is there a reevaluation for services? So it did mention that under the psychological evaluation that Carl was not deemed that he needed to have full-time services, and I'm just curious, would there be grounds for a reevaluation? And then also open to services. Excuse me. So would the family themselves, or Carl and in general, be open to seeing somebody or trying to get help or those kinds of things? So there's one thing of getting them connected, but also the other thing about, are they actually going to take that help? Okay, so category 1, part C. So what is the actual problem? So there's a lack of resources, I would say. It is in a small district and those kinds of things. There, it seems that there are things that we can do, such as the interventions, there's help, those kinds, but maybe not all the things that they need. We also know that Nancy Taylor, this is going to be her, is a bit uncooperative, isn't willing to work, she just wants to get the child out of her room. We also know that the family clearly is in need of support, kind of based on what was said within the meeting, and the mom just kind of breaking down crying, the dad saying well, I'm just going to go, and so there's definitely some issues going on there. And also, it's clear that the staff is in need of training how to deal with issues of de-escalation and those kinds of things. So, the reason I put this picture here is kind of, it's just a representation of the chaos that, we don't really know what is kind of going on in the deeper levels. Now, as a principal and what issues that we're facing, I would say the biggest thing that we're facing right now is Nancy. We have the availability to do interventions. The parents are supportive to some degree, right? They're willing to work and they're willing to say hey, this is okay, which is something. That is something. So from that standpoint, I think the thing right now is that as the principal, the issue is Nancy and how are we going to get her on board. But then obviously there are the underlying issues. We don't really know exactly what's going on with the family, and there's going to be more and more things that might come up. We don't really know where this behavior is particularly stemming from. So yeah. Okay, proposed plan of action and strategies for implementation. So part A, the action plan, definitely, like I said, the focus should be Nancy. So how are we going to work on Nancy? How are we going to get her on board? Next, I would say seek advice from Mrs. Wills. It's apparent that she's willing to provide support and help and advice and all those things. So, seeking further advice, continuing to keep that communication with her. And I'm sure that's somebody that you could talk to that would be aware of maybe any outside or inside services that the family could be seeing or Carl could be seeing to kind of get this additional emotional support and help. Also stick with the intervention plan, because there is an intervention plan. So that's, I think, that was already great. That was already kind of a great way to resolve this issue, was to come up with an intervention plan. So I would say stick with that. It seems like that's something that could work, and it's something that's available. So stick with that. But obviously that's going to take us to be working with Nancy. Initiate a reevaluation process if that is available. So again, that might be seeking that advice from Mrs. Wills and determining, are we going to be able to do that reevaluation for Carl on the psychological needs. And then also building trust with Carl. So As the principal, I think it was a little bit unclear in the case study that whether or not there's going to be a kind of a male teacher working, or if it's going to be the principal working with him in those like interventions, the pullouts, when he's having an issue or something like that. So either way, you're going to have to build some trust with Carl and kind of build that rapport, that safe place with him, and so that's going to need to happen. Okay, so moving forward, also again with the action plan, kind of dive deeper a little bit on Miss Taylor, that you're going to need to build a relationship with her. It's clear that she was, walking out of that meeting pretty upset and like, hey, the other teacher did this, right? Like, she would have just made sure that the student went into the room in the detention room and did a book. So how are we going to build that relationship with Mrs. Taylor to be able to kind of get her on board? And part of that is that she needs to know why. And what I mean by that is she needs to know the moral and ethical reasons as well as the legal reasons. So Carl, as the student, he has the right to a free and appropriate public education, right? He does have that right, and he has that right to be in the classroom and to be there and learn, and that's his right as much as anybody else of other students' rights. So knowing that in a moral stance, that look like this is a little boy that it does need help, and he does need our help, and he does need to learn, and he needs to learn not only the curriculum, but he needs to learn how to function well in society, right? Like keeping that focus on how is it that we're serving students' academic achievement and well-being. So I'm going to kind of continue on with that. And also the legal, right? Again, going back to the free and appropriate education, going back to IDEA, right? Like this is a legal obligation that we have to meet this. Even if the parents aren't like, going to sue or something, like them particularly, I mean, it could be whatever the case may be, right? There is a legal obligation. So getting her to kind of understand those obligations. And then also I would say empower. So what I mean by that is, and I'm going to dive into this more too, but what are the tools that she has to where she doesn't feel helpless in the classroom and she doesn't feel like, well, I just need to get him out of here, right? Like, what is it that, how are we empowering her to where she has more control over the situation? So, here we go. Implementation strategy. So that's where I kind of want to talk about is, how are we looking about this as a fuller issue? So first of all, ownership of the problem. So as the leader, as the person who's in charge of solving the situation, taking ownership of the problem and understanding that the staff is not trained to handle these types of situations, understanding that the staff does not believe in the plan, that it's important to have him stay within the classroom as much as possible, and that these interventions are in place when necessary. And also I would say, like, part of that is that what I didn't see happening was that there wasn't any input from Nancy, right? Like her input was figure this out and fix it. And I need it to be this thing. So, kind of bringing her in and saying, hey, so here are the parameters. What are your ideas? Right, but establishing the parameters that he needs to make sure that he stays in the classroom as much as possible, to where then maybe she can even come up with, okay, well, maybe there's just something that we could do to where he can leave the classroom when he's acting up or something, right? And she comes up with that intervention plan as opposed to you bringing that intervention plan down to her and her saying, well, that's not good enough, right? So how is it that we can kind of play that game of having them come up with a solution with, again, those parameters that the student does need to get that free and appropriate education? Okay, so lessons learned. Also, so how is this going to be playing out long term? Excuse me. Knowing how to connect family and students to services is going to be necessary moving forward long term. So again, not just looking at it as this one singular issue, but kind of making it a broader picture. And then also, professional development. How can we teach teachers to de-escalation strategies to where these things don't become these bigger issues as they have? Okay, so resolving the issue. How are we making sure we're serving all students? Well, I think, the big part of that is keeping students in class. That's going to be for their well-being and academic achievement, right? If they're not in the classroom, they're not going to be exposed to that material, and it's also going to be a safer place for them to be in that classroom and not in this isolation of like, here's, sit in this room, like we're basically sticking you within this like solitary confinement and giving you a book. Like that's not going to be conducive to that child's well-being. And then again, just kind of remembering that this is the first, but certainly not the last. It's not going to be the last troubling student. It's not going to be the last teacher that's not sure, that doesn't have the skills and strategies to deal with the student. And it's also not going to be the last time of a need to be able to connect families to services. So just understanding this is the first, but not the last. So that's how we're serving all students, is by putting forth these policies and procedures that are then going to be able to serve students down the line. Okay, so again, serving all students, teachers need training. as I've kind of said. So that's de-escalation training, that's ethics training, that's training on the legalities of special education. So how are we getting them to understand, like, one, this is a necessity, this is a moral obligation, right? Like, we have a moral obligation to serve all these students towards our future. So, getting them to understand that. And then also, like, giving them tools. Not just saying, like, hey, you have to do it, figure it out. But here are some tools that you can do this. Like, when a child is getting upset, like, remember to keep, like, your an emotional constancy yourself. Remember to, whatever it is, but, have that training for them. And then also interventions, make sure that those are being utilized. Again, we're understanding that the de-escalation strategies, they're not always going to work, and, there still might be issues, but that's why there are the interventions that they came up with, and that's why we can still keep those in place. And again, that's going to be, serving the teachers and the students by, it's not like we're not doing anything, right? There was the idea of an intervention, and we can put that into place. So, try that first. Okay. Feelings and unresolved problems. Moving into my opinions of the case. So I tend to think pretty metaphorically, and I kind of thought about this like with, this is like the Hercules and the Hydra, right? Like that, as you kind of dig into these problems and just thinking about the problem, it's like, what is the problem that we can focus on and actually solve? Now, I think that there are certainly some underlying issues going on, psychological issues within the family that, are best going to be figured out by a school psychologist or social worker or something like that, that are going to be able to get to those, core issues that are really going on. So that's why, that was a big part of my plan. Because there's only so much that we can do on the surface, and, as we kind of try to solve these problems tend to get bigger and bigger. So, how are we addressing any kind of these root causes? And then also, so what is the root? Also remembering that it takes a village, so we're, the old cliche, but that we're going to be able to serve the student best through utilizing all the resources that we have around us. I also was thinking about ownership, so again, that's kind of going back to what is it that I have done as a leader to not be able to foresee the situation and, could have done a better job of making sure the situation doesn't happen. And what am I going to do to make sure that this type of issue doesn't come up in the future? So taking ownership of that and being able to move from there. And then I also, just as I kind of move through this, the feeling and the drive that I have was, okay, how is this supporting student academic achievement and well-being? So, and that's getting into category 5, but we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so one other unresolved issue might be abuse, and that's something that we're just not sure is maybe going on. When it was asked, like, hey, Carl, like, what's causing this? Like, we kind of asked him and just kind of shoved your shoulders, looked down, and wouldn't say anything. So, maybe there's that possibility of something like that going on. It also seems maybe kind of likely, too, because there's an inconsistency of what's happening of when these things arise. So, but again, that's why I kind of put this picture in, and that we kind of got to be able to pull our resources and get to those root issues that are going on. So yeah, what is the root cause? Is it circumstantial? So could it have been, one particular instance, or is it more a psychological, broader psychological issue that's going on with Carl? So that's something, again, that is going to be kind of dug into if we can get into those psychological needs. And then also Miss Taylor, right? Is she going to be open to, right, like anything that we talk about with her? So that's going to be obviously an unresolved issue. Is she going to be able to get on board eventually? Like how, and that obviously takes a lot of relationship building and trust building, going out to lunch, and right, like really trying to get her on board and trying to get her to understand the necessity for this to happen. And also, again, like empowering her, but is she going to be open to that, or is she going to be stubborn? So we hope not, but that, still an unresolved issue. We don't know. And then also inside and outside services, are those available or not? Okay, serving all students through school community relations, promoting academic success. I think that I did that through student exposure to learning. We're trying to keep the child in the classroom as much as possible. Attempting to address the root problem. Again, like the child's not going to be able to, Carl, that is, right? He's not going to be able to really succeed and focus in class and those things if he cannot, if we're not getting to those root issues and getting those resolved, or at least like attempting to resolve those. So, I think that addresses that for his promoting his academic achievement and success. And then building skills and knowledge, full staff. So again, kind of that professional development piece, but we'll touch on that here in a second. Promoting personal well-being. So building relationships and trust. Again, that's going back to Carl. It's also going back to the teachers, and we're promoting the well-being of the of the child by creating that inclusive and loving environment, and ensuring that, again, they're staying in that classroom and it's a safe environment for them. So building knowledge and empathy within the teachers. How is it that they can, their knowledge of the legalities, but also their knowledge of and tools of how to deal with these issues. Providing safe learning environment, right? That's kind of what we're talking about with these de-escalation strategies, not making things worse, but being able to like take things down and get Carl to he's not being a safety concern within the classroom. Training and de-escalation, right? That's what I kind of talked about. And also with peers. So, oh yeah, sorry, that's where I was going. And then the interventions that are utilized. So remembering that as far as the well-being of all students, right? Like there is the concern still that, hey, maybe it's not such a good idea to have this student in the classroom. And I think that it's like, yes, we're not acknowledging that. We're saying that, yeah, that is an issue. We want to see him to stay in that classroom as much as possible. But in the event that that's not or not something that we can actually do, in the event that there is this escalation, that if we have to, we're going to this intervention where he's getting pulled from the classroom to kind of cool down and those kinds of things, and getting him to where he's ready to go back into the classroom again. So, all right, so enhance instructional capacity, as I've already mentioned throughout, right? Providing teacher training, that's on ethics, that's on the legalities, and that's on the de-escalation strategies. Providing those interventions that we had already mentioned, so keeping those in place, so that the teacher then can continue to instruct and those kinds of things, and knows how to get a student out of the classroom. Even that can be difficult sometimes, right? Like, how do we ensure that those interventions are going into place and we're not further escalating a student when we're saying like, hey, like, we're gonna have to step out of the classroom, right? Like, what is the language that we use around that? And then finally, the services, so being able to connect family and teachers to services, and just kind of building that capacity of the staff and the knowledge of the staff that, hey, these things are available, and those are things that we can do. All right, well, thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed. I always enjoy doing these, so thank you.